A wealthy Roman sits at dinner with his father. The food is prepared. The wine is poured. The son watches his father eat. But before the meal ends, the father falls ill. By morning, he's dead. The son inherits everything. This scene played out again and again in Rome's richest families. Not once, not twice, hundreds of times. And here's the shocking part. Nobody was surprised. In fact, poisoning family members for inheritance was so common that Roman historians had a word for it. They called it the Roman way to settle debts. To understand why Romans poisoned each other, you first need to understand what they were fighting over. When a wealthy Roman elite died, their heirs didn't just inherit a comfortable life, they inherited empires. A single wealthy Roman could own million gold coins in annual revenue from estates alone, not total, per year. That's equivalent to owning an entire country's treasury that regenerated every single year. One senator left his heirs cattle, pairs of oxen, and million gold coins in cash, just sitting there. He also owned thousands of slaves, trained as accountants, builders, firemen, and artisans. He owned hundreds of properties across Rome itself. He owned trade networks that stretched from Egypt to India, bringing in profits that would make modern billionaires jealous. And that was one man the richest families controlled. Even more so when the current owner of that wealth was old or sick, the heirs didn't wait for him to die naturally. They couldn't afford to, because fortunes that large attracted attention, competitors, rivals, other family members who thought they deserved it more. The only way to guarantee your inheritance was to make sure nobody else could claim it, and the fastest way to do that was poison. This wasn't speculation. Ancient Roman historians documented it extensively. The historian Tacitus wrote about it. Matter-of-factly, he describes poisoning as a normal business transaction among the wealthy. The philosopher Seneca, who was himself one of Rome's richest men, controlling over million gold coins in debt claims alone, wrote extensively about poisoning in elite families. He wasn't writing to condemn it. He was writing to explain the economics of it, because that's all it was. Economics. A Roman senator named Sejanus orchestrated the poisoning of an entire family line to inherit their wealth. He didn't hide it. He published announcements of the deaths as if they were natural. The Emperor Tiberius himself documented cases of poisoning in his private correspondence, not to investigate them, just to keep track of which families were eliminating each other so he could decide who to tax and who to spare. It was bureaucratic. A lawyer named Gaius wrote a legal text that actually addressed the question. If a man poisons his father to inherit, does he forfeit the inheritance? The answer was complicated. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It depended on whether the poisoner had political connections. This tells you something crucial. Poisoning family members for inheritance was so common that the Roman legal system had to create laws to address it. They didn't prosecute everyone. They prosecuted the ones without powerful friends. Why did Roman elite poison their family members? The answer is simple. Impatience. When you're born into a family controlling million gold coins per year, waiting for the current owner to die naturally feels like watching paint dry. You could wait years, and in the meantime, other family members might make their own moves. A brother might marry advantageously and claim he deserves more. A sister's husband might demand his share. Cousins might appear with legal claims. The inheritance could be divided, delayed, contested. But if the current owner
dies suddenly,
and you're the only one around, everything is yours. Immediately, a Roman historian named Ammianus described it this way: the wealthy Roman waited for death, like a man waits at the market, for goods to be delivered, and if the delivery took too long, he simply helped it along. The wealthier the family, the more likely poisoning became, because the stakes were higher. The methods were sophisticated. Roman elite didn't use crude poisons that left obvious symptoms. They used toxins that mimicked natural illness. A poison called aconite could be mixed into wine and would cause symptoms identical to a sudden stroke. The victim would collapse, unable to move or speak, dead within hours. Nobody would suspect poison. Another toxin, from the hemlock plant, could be disguised in food and would cause what looked like a heart attack. The Roman physician Celsus actually documented these poisons. He wasn't writing to warn against them. He was writing them down for reference, like recipes. But here's the most disturbing part. Sometimes the poisoning was done slowly, over weeks or months. A family member would add small amounts of poison to the victim's food, enough to cause slow illness, but not enough to raise suspicion. The victim would waste away, lose weight, become bedridden. The heir would hire nurses, call physicians, spend money on treatments. Then, when the victim finally died, everyone would say, yes, he had been ill for months. This was inevitable. The death looked natural. The heir looked grieving and innocent. A woman named Livia, married to the Emperor Augustus himself, was accused by historians of poisoning her way through her husband's family to ensure her son inherited the throne. She allegedly poisoned
Augustus' nephew,
his adopted son, his grandson. When Augustus finally died, after years of marriage, her son inherited everything. Did she face justice?
No.
She became the most powerful woman in Rome. Here's what makes this even darker. The poisonings created a cycle. Once one family member poisoned another, the remaining heirs became paranoid. They started hiring food tasters, starting food yourself, to test if it was poisoned. Some wealthy Romans employed slaves, whose only job was to eat the master's food first, to check for poison. But paranoia creates opportunity. The food taster himself could be bribed to poison the master instead, or the heir could poison the food taster once he'd served his purpose. So the poisoning continued, but now it spread beyond the immediate family. Servants got poisoned if they knew too much. Slaves got poisoned if they threatened to reveal secrets. Doctors got poisoned if they threatened to testify about the symptoms. What started as a fight over inheritance became a massacre. One family, documented by historians, went through deaths in years. Not war, not plague, just poisoning. The survivors inherited incomprehensible wealth, but they were alone, surrounded by people they didn't trust, because anyone could be the next poisoner. A young Roman heir grew up watching his parents poison relatives. He saw his father slip poison into his uncle's wine. At a family dinner, he watched his mother smile while his cousin slowly died from contaminated food. What did he learn? That love doesn't exist. Trust doesn't exist. That the only thing real is money. So when his father finally died, possibly from poison, possibly naturally, nobody could tell anymore. He inherited million gold coins per year. He was rich beyond imagination. He had everything, and he was absolutely terrified, because he knew exactly how easy it was to poison someone, and he knew that everyone around him knew it too. Every meal was a risk. Every servant was a threat. Every family member was a potential killer, waiting for him to become too old or weak. So he started poisoning first, not because he needed the money, but because he needed to feel safe. The historian Suetonius wrote about this psychological breakdown among Rome's wealthiest families. He describes them as men who possessed everything, but feared everything. They had conquered the world, but they couldn't conquer the terror of their own families. What Rome experienced with poisoning mirrors something modern psychology has discovered. When unlimited wealth and power are available,
normal moral restraints
disappear. The psychologist Philip Zimbardo called this the corruption of power. When someone controls vast resources with no external checks, they lose the ability to see other people as human. They become tools, obstacles, competitors. The Roman elite didn't see their fathers as fathers. They saw them as obstacles to inherited wealth. They didn't see their siblings as siblings. They saw them as threats. And once you stop seeing people as human, poisoning them becomes as easy as business. The historian Will Durant wrote, "The Romans proved that unlimited wealth plus unlimited power,
no moral restraint,
self-destruction." The poisoning epidemic of the late Roman Empire wasn't caused by lack of money. It was caused by too much money. The poisonings began in the late Republic, around BC, when fortunes first started concentrating in elite hands. By BC, poisoning was documented regularly. By the imperial era, under Augustus and Tiberius, it was endemic. By AD, it was the expected way for inheritances to change hands. By AD, the most powerful families were decimated, not by enemies, by themselves. The great families that had ruled Rome for centuries were poisoning themselves into extinction. Some families, like the Julio-Claudians, went through their entire lineage in a few generations, each member poisoning the previous one. By the time Rome's civilization was collapsing in the SAD, the elite were so busy poisoning each other that they couldn't govern. Provinces rebelled, barbarians invaded, the empire fractured, and the wealthy Roman families, they were still poisoning each other over inheritance. So what does this tell us? A civilization that rejected family, that rejected commitment, that rejected morality. What civilization can survive that? None. Rome didn't fall to barbarian invasions. Fell because the people at the top had already abandoned everything that held civilization together. They abandoned their children. They abandoned their marriages. They abandoned their families. By the time they were poisoning each other for money, there was nothing left to defend. Nobody left to care about. No reason to keep the system alive. And so it ended, not with a bang, just slowly, as one wealthy family poisoned themselves into extinction after another.